Hello and welcome to Chatz In A Pickle, a podcast covering non-struck work in the world of pop culture. I am Alan Ibrahim, and I'm joined as always by my best friend and co-host, Magellan.
Hey, what's up?
Not much, man. I'm doing well. I was about to go meta, and I realized I literally went meta last week, and I'm not going to ask you about the sort of syntactical meaning of saying what's up. I'm just going to tell you I'm doing well and not overanalyze it like I'm doing right now. Right now, I'm doing great. I got to see you this weekend. Is there anything better than that? I don't think so.
I think the thing better is having seen me this past weekend and then seeing me again.
Yes, exactly. Oh, God.
When was the last time you saw me 2 consecutive weekends, yeah?
Oh, that's like high school at least. Maybe middle school. Because we got busy. Yeah, it was really fun. We got to have a sort of early Thanksgiving with Magellan's family, and it was delicious. And the girlfriend of the podcast, Amanda, was there, and friend of the podcast, Jim, was there, and everyone was there. And I had a great time. And I'm still coming off of that dopamine high, if you will. Got a new phone. Told you about that. What else is new in the world? I don't know, dude. I might start a new job soon. I might not. I don't know. Hopefully before the end of the year, I know the answer to that for sure. Just kidding. There's huge news, guys. The strike is over. Thunderous applause. Thunderous applause. From
Wait, no, I have a no, not the outside horns. I have a sound effect for applause. I was on the other page that has the pickle song, which is why I wasn't able to do this.
Hold on. Thunderous applause?
Diet Coke. Diet Coke.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Do you actually have thunderous applause?
Oh, that wasn't struck work, so I could have done that one before.
Yeah.
I do have a plus.
Yeah, the strikes are over! Hooray!
Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Delightfully devilish SAG-AFTRA indeed. They've signed paperwork. There's still a vote to be had from when we're recording this, so if something dramatically changes in the midnight hour, I'll edit this. But from what we understand right now, the strike is over. We can talk about struck work again. That means that we have some content that we owe you guys in the near future.
Yeah. Should I give them the rundown of what that's going to be?
Yeah, I think that there's a non-zero chance that there's somebody who also joined for Chatz In A Pickle and doesn't know what we do normally. So yeah, hit him with it.
Okay, so normally in standard seasons, we are a television podcast where we watch 2 episodes of a TV show every week. But we were in the middle of an atypical season for us when the strike came on, and we also have some other atypical content that we feel is overdue. So this is our penultimate Chatz In A Pickle episode. Next week, it'll be my last pickle, and it'll be kind of a season wrap up sort of a thing. It'll give us time to ramp up to our other content, because following that, the first episode released in the month of December will be Trek Chats 7, where we will watch season 7 of Star Trek TNG and conclude our coverage of The Next Generation, which is exciting. Following that, we are going to do an episode on, God, it was so annoying that one of our favorite shows, Babylon 5, released a new thing at a time when we couldn't talk about it. So we are going to do a Chatsalon 5 episode on the film The Road Home. In our tradition of how we do Babylon 5 movies, it's going to be a commentary with friend of the podcast, Charlie, who has only ever seen Babylon 5 movies and has never seen any other Babylon 5 stuff. So that's going to be our second episode released in the month of December. And then we're going to return to our season Couch Madness, where we have been matching up TV shows against each other to figure out what is going to be the next full season of Chatz Television Podcast. So in later in December, we're going to do the matchup between The Tick and 6 Feet Under. Then we'll do Battlestar Galactica versus Sequest DSV. We'll close the calendar year with Fringe versus The Twilight Zone. We'll open the next calendar year with Death Note versus Halt and Catch Fire. And then we'll move on to round 2 of the bracket, where shows that have gone up against each other before and won are going up against their next competitors. So that's the next month and a half or so of Chatz content that's going to be coming your way. after we conclude Chats in a Pickle next week.
Fantastic. Beautiful rundown, Magellan. Thank you. Ask if you have questions about the plan. Ask us in the Discord. Email us. We have show notes at the end to explain all of that. But today, before we get into my pickle, we have a crucial segment.
Pickle in the fridge. I got a pickle in the fridge. I got my wife all over me. But there's a pickle in the fridge. When my wife is at work, I touch the pickle in the fridge. When my wife is at home, I do not touch the pickle in the fridge. Cause there's a pickle in the fridge. I'm gonna punch you with my teeth.
God, I love it so much. Brian Jordan Alvarez, kiss me on the lips.
Second to last time we're going to play it on the show. So, Alan, did you eat any pickles this week? I gotta know.
You know it, buddy. God, I ate the best pickles I've had in a while this week. And they were with you! Plot twist. Yeah, your mom had laid out a great appetizer spread before Thanksgiving dinner. And that included tiny little pickles, which everybody devoured in about 30 seconds because they were so good. I think those tiny little pickles are better than like pickle spears. Is that controversial? Yeah.
Those are pretty good. Those little tiny pickles.
Well, you can crunch them with your teeth, which is crucial. They don't have as much of a crunch as a spear. So if that's what you're coming for, then like I get it. You're not a fan as much. But if I want to add pickles to a sandwich, yeah, I'm gonna use the spears. I'm gonna put mini pickles in my sandwich. That's not kosher. I mean, it is kosher, but it's not. It's not holy. Anyways,
I mean, Chatsums are basically named for that. I don't know if those were Vlasic Snackums particularly, but those little mini pickles, I mean, that's what we're all about. So
yes,
we got to enjoy those tiny small pickles, which was great.
I think Snackums are a little bit bigger, smaller than spears, but bigger than a bread box. Isn't it funny how people use a bread box as like the most common thing for 20 questions, but nobody has a bread box?
Tell you what a bread box looks like anymore.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, bread box. Yeah.
Not the Sandra Bullock movie where they have to cross the river, but the thing that holds bread together. Anyways, that means that you, by proxy, also enjoyed.
I had a pickle from the same plate.
You crunch it with your teeth?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's successful. People were saying that our final pickle check should be us making pickles on episode, and I was like, I think pickles take several days to become pickles.
Yeah,
but,
don't you have to like brine them for a while or something?
Yeah, but then someone was like, "Oh, there's like short-term ways to do it, which is valid." And now Quickles. All
right.
We'll look. All right. It might just be during the episode, or maybe I just like bring out the pickles, and I eat them during the episode until I feel sick. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. The world is open to us now.
Quick pickled. Yeah, I'm looking into it. We could do it. I guess we could try it this weekend, maybe. Okay.
No, don't say this weekend. Whenever we like meet up and say we're gonna do something, it doesn't happen. We gotta be realistic here.
I think we could.
Also, it is your weekend. If you want to do it, you can do it.
I think we could make it our mission on Friday evening when you come in. I'll make sure to get the ingredients prior.
Okay.
And Friday night we start the quickling process. So that by Saturday we can crunch it with our teeth.
Oh my god! Okay, great.
And we'll just record. We'll record it.
Okay, great.
All right, everybody, is that good?
Are you happy? Right.
Is that fine for you?
Stop yelling at us.
Slice cucumbers as desired. Whisk together a basic brine made of water, vinegar, and seasonings. Pack the cucumbers into a jar, add some dill and garlic, and pour the brine over it all. Refrigerate until the pickles taste sufficiently pickled.
That's just how you make pickles, but the longer you keep them, the better. I'm sure
the more
that's
pickled they are. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We'll do it. But there's no like secret alchemy way to do it. Yeah.
A pickle.
Yeah, you're looking up the right stuff. There's no way to alchemize like a 2-hour pickle. That's just not possible. That's against God.
Let the quickles pickle for anything between 1 to 30 minutes. And taste until you're happy with the level of pickle flavor and texture.
What?
Pickles should last in an airtight container for 2 weeks in the fridge.
I literally you can't dispute the thing I just said. That's nuts. Internet.
How to quick pickle any vegetable.
All right, save this for off pod because now we're on the episode. We're performing right now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I need to be present. But yeah, we can quickle it pretty quickly.
This weekend. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Amazing. We have a pickle to discuss this week, and it's my pickle. I want to talk about why I picked it, but first, it is the podcast. This is actually happening from Wondery Media. Specifically, for this pickle discussion, I had us listen to episodes 260, What If Your Husband Claimed You Were Dead? 261, What If Your Mother Was a Victim of a Secret Government Experiment? And 266, What If You Thought Everyone Was Dead? Yeah, this is pretty far out of our comfort zone, Magellan. I know that's like our initial thought, and it was my intention when choosing it to get us as far out as I felt we could like safely go. Partly because I like to challenge us, and I felt like if Chatz In A Pickle is ending for now, then like let's use it to do something that we're not good at right now, which is discussing much more serious, darker media, especially in the podcast field. I don't think we've done a podcast on here yet, a podcast pickle, and there was that. I also did some Google searching for like podcasts that have made people cry, and that was how I ended up landing on This Is Actually Happening. Because I'm the kind of person who really loves an emotional release, a catharsis, the kind of feeling you have at the end of a Studio Ghibli movie. But that's usually like the movie's over or the characters fell in love kind of cry. And that's not the type of crying that I found myself engaging in when listening to This Is Actually Happening. I want to start by asking you if you had A, heard of this podcast at all, and B, what was your vibe listening to the episodes that you listened to?
No, I wasn't familiar with it. I'll be honest, I haven't really like sought out new podcasts or listened to very many podcasts at all for going on 1.5 years at this point, or 2 years. I've like been kind of out of practice as a podcast listener. So I didn't really have a beat on like, I'd heard of Wondery Media before as a podcast network, so you know, there's some sense of like, okay, I can see that this is like professionally produced, probably widely listened to, but I was not familiar with it, and I was a little apprehensive at first because the way that it struck me from like the show description and some of the titles of the episodes, I thought this was going to be like a true crime podcast, which I'm really not a fan of. Right. But in the process of listening to the episodes, and after you texted me some of your thinking about like why you chose this show, I very quickly realized like it's not one of those podcasts. It's essentially like the quality of human-centeredness and heart of like the best episodes of This American Life or something, but about, you know, much more difficult subject matter and like personal trauma and processing. And I think it was a hard listening experience, but at least the 2 episodes we listened to, both of them curved towards being like pretty hopeful by the end of them. So it's not something that you're going to walk out of being like totally weighed down by, I don't think, because you kind of go through like the person's entire arc of this was this horrible thing or this really difficult thing, and here's what I've made of it at this point in my life. So for me, it was like definitely an uncomfortable experience, but ultimately I think a really helpful one, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Was that your sense of it or your feelings about it? Like how'd you hear of this and want to bring it to us, I guess, besides like searching for it and all that? What was your vibe listening to this?
Yeah, sorry, so to be clear, I listened to the third one. Magellan, you had a time crunch and listened to the first two.
Yeah, I just listened to the first 2.
Perfect. The third one I'll describe it. Maybe it was my favorite one just because the ending is really nice, but I also liked all 3 of these. I came to Wondery because of Smartless. My old boss was like, you do podcasts, you should listen to Smartless, which is like one of the most listened to podcasts in the world. It's Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett just like being funny with their guests. Fine podcast, but on their network you also hear about other shows, and This Is Actually Happening bills itself as just like real stories from real people that are so out there that they are life-changing, and you're going to hear about them. Pretty straightforward premise. I am also definitely not a fan of true crime. Even though like I understand what the appeal is for a lot of people. I have friends who are into true crime. I've like known people who are into true crime. And when I was listening to these episodes, I felt myself engaging with them the way I probably would when listening to certain like true crime stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically in that I was like, why did this happen? Oh my God. And then what? And like I was kind of on the edge of my seat, and then realizing like this is a real person's life, and I need to be like really cognizant of that, because I'm not just a listener. I'm like complicit in the storytelling aspect. So another reason that this is sort of my selfish reason for why I chose to pickle this podcast is I myself love storytelling. I love interviewing people and doing interview stuff. I think my dream side project that I've been cooking now for about 3 years is going to turn out to be an interview podcast, focusing on people in my life. And the reason I keep listening to shows like this is I want to figure out what that's going to sound like, and like what to be very aware of when making a show like that, like when it's about real people. Because in conversation with someone, you can go all sorts of places, go into darkness, come back to levity. But when you're doing a podcast, like the listener is a participant in a way, you know, they care about, and in this case, because these people are real, and in the case of the third episode, they are named, you have a responsibility, both as a creator and as a listener, to like tell the story right, so to speak. So I posed this concept to the Discord, and May Louise, friend of the podcast, May Louise, made a great point that like part of the problem with true crime is that the stories are so often told as if like to shock and surprise the listener, and that's where it can feel kind of abusive and unfair to the original people. Like I think that 2014's Serial really did a number on people.
Bring up Serial,
because that's a real case that happened and is technically still ongoing, and people have their opinions on it. It feels somewhat tainted, and even Serial was aware of that, right? By season 3, they like made it about a courtroom instead of about a particular person, because they felt uncomfortable with how people were engaging with the work. And so listening to this, the thing I took away was like, this is actually happening, is a podcast where the stories are told by the people that it happened to, not by podcasters, not by the network. The network is, and the technically host, you know, is the medium through which they tell the stories. I'm also similar to this in terms of storytelling podcasts, a really big fan of Chris Gethard's show Beautiful Anonymous. And I'm a weekly listener to that at this point. I mentioned over the past couple of weeks how I was binging it, and the difference is obviously that podcast is sometimes about the dynamic between Chris and the guest, but I'd say since they've gone independent, it's been a lot more of just like, here's a normal person with an interesting story. Almost the exact opposite of this is actually happening, right? Like, because this is actually happening is, here's somebody, just a person that you don't know, that had the most ridiculous, awful, tragic, but also like incredible things happen to them, and they're gonna just tell you that story with no judgment or opinion, but like it does a really good job. The fact that they're being told by the person it happened to, of helping you empathize, I think, with the victims and with the people involved in these situations.
I think what's interesting to me about what you're describing of this sort of double-edged sword of doing like people's personal vulnerable stories in the podcasting medium is, on the one hand, you can have like a story on a podcast can move very quickly to a lot of people, because there's like a low barrier to creating it and a low barrier to consuming it. So you have situations like Serial, where everybody and their next door neighbor had an opinion about Anand's case, and like, did he do it, did he not do it? And it's like, this isn't productive. This is not creating like a just situation. We're all just kind of voyeuristically involving ourselves in the particulars of these people's lives, without those individuals having like full agency over how that takes place. But what I liked about this is actually happening, like you're describing, is people are telling their own story. And so you can create a situation where like we're listening to people who themselves might not have the means or the skills or the training or the time to create like an edited podcast documentary about their life experience or whatever. but like they have a story that can help people. And so this is a context in which they can tell that story in a way that, at least on the surface, feels as if it is steered by their own processing and their own interpretations of what that story means. So I like that. In form, it reminds me a lot, funnily enough, of Song Exploder.
Yeah.
This sort of like the interviewer is absent. There is no like recording of the interviewer asking questions, so that the interviewee and their process and their thinking is at the center of it. And it feels almost as if they're like having a conversation with you, the listener. And obviously, like you're saying, there's a lot of ethical considerations and artistic considerations about you're creating the illusion that the interviewee is talking to the listener, but really like the editor is this kind of invisible intermediary who's deciding what sequence these things are set in and where to cut the sentence and how to set the music to it. So there are these artistic choices about how the thing is communicated, but the sentiment, at least, of the way it's formatted is this person's voice is like the most important part of this. And the fact of them telling their own story is the mission of this show. So for that reason, I really liked it. But I also agree with you that there were times where I was listening to it and I caught myself listening to it in a somewhat voyeuristic way, or like oh my God, like what the hell, that really happened, like especially the second episode.
Yeah.
But I think it also is beneficial to, we'll get into the particulars of that episode, but there's like kind of good and bad to it. Anyway, so that's my thought about the things that you shared there.
Yeah, another great point that was brought up was, these shows tend to lean into something called tragedy porn, like whether it's true crime or just like you won't believe this is true type storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think the difference is like, what is tragedy porn, right? It's a voyeurism with the intent of creating a voyeuristic state, right? It's storytelling that is meant to make you go, oh my God, I am so interested. I want to know everything. Tell me everything. And while that is here, it feels like the ultimate goal of this is actually happening is, like you said, this is just a story. It's value neutral. As soon as you put in a narration that says like, oh, that was pretty fucked up, huh? Maybe it makes you think about X, Y, and Z. Then you're in tragedy porn because you're telling me, hey, you're distance from this. But no, like these are all people, and they're not given names on purpose because like these are people in our community, right? These are all three of these people are regular human beings who grew up the way that we all did, and just certain things in their lives went drastically different ways.
Yeah.
And I think to that point also, Arthur made a good comment that it's like, how do we make stories out of the chaos of our lives, right? Like these are narrativized podcasts with a beginning, middle, and a nice little bow at the end. And I do like the bow at the end of each episode because they're hopeful and they're emotional and beautiful. And I also think that almost helps it avoid the tragedy porn thing of like, this ends kind of well, right? Like if this was like, this person's life sucks, this horrible thing happened to them, there it is, deal with it, like that's sad, isn't it? Then I would feel really bad listening to this podcast and not want to listen to more of it. But to choose to give the person a chance at the end to say, hey, here's how I picked myself up and lived beyond this tragic event, I think is really a really, really strong feature of the pod.
Yeah, I think by design, I'm not going to make a judgment about like it is or is not tragedy porn, because like I don't have a set opinion about that or
right.
where to even draw the lines there. But it's also sort of like, I'll take the Supreme Court opinion on tragedy porn that I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. And I don't think I see it here. But by design, you're listening to people who are ready to tell you this story, right? And that
there's a distance from the story.
That makes a difference, because the way that it has become narrativized is over the span of years of their lives, at least the 2 episodes that I listened to. I'm assuming this is the case for other ones in the show. Over the course of their lives, they have processed these stories and made narratives of them and made meaning of them, identified like, here are the important events that people need to understand, not to like feel this sort of like, ooh, oh my gosh, what the hell, but to feel the thematic importance and resonance of the story and what it means to people. So it's not just a laying bare of like shocking facts. It's here is the story that I have kind of woven out of the events of my life. Now, it's unfortunate that the show is called This Is Actually Happening, because I think that title is very provocative.
Yes.
And lends itself to a kind of like, this is a tragedy porn show reading. So I don't love the title of the show, to be honest.
Yes.
And I don't think it exactly lines up with what's in the show. I think a similar piece of media that I really love that walks this kind of gray line is the documentary Dear Zachary, which is essentially, I can't describe it too much, but it's essentially this guy talking about the passing of a friend of his. And it's addressed, the documentary is addressed to this friend's kid, Zachary, which is why it's called Dear Zachary. So it's like, hey, you probably want to know like who your dad was. So I'm going to make you this little documentary where I tell you about him. And over the course of the documentary, I'm not going to spoil anything, but basically at every act break, there's this like big drop of information where you're like, oh my God, this whole story just got 10 times more upsetting and 10 times more tragic. And the documentary does that twice. And it's this tricky thing of like, well, on the one hand, this documentary is trying to like shock me or upset me into feeling a particular feeling. But on the other hand, this is what the filmmaker needed to do in order to process these events. And he's presenting it to us. Like the sequence here is the sequence by which he was able to process these things. And so I think naturally, as you tell a difficult story, you're going to get to the more upsetting details because you're building up like your ability to even acknowledge their existence or engage with them. So that to me, like the arc of these episodes felt like the arc of what it feels like to actually process a traumatic event. Yeah.
And how like with distance and with time and therapy and community, you can find yourself telling it in a narrativized way, even if when you were living it, it wasn't that. But after this is people, like you said, returning after the fact and going, hey, this happened to me. And here's what I learned about it, you know, like beginning, middle, and end kind of way, which our lives don't work like that. So,
and like drawing connections from their childhood to now and like contextualizing it in other people's perspectives. And here's what this person was probably going through, or, you know, a lot of thinking that comes from quite a bit of reflection and insight and self-exploration.
So that being said, do you want to kind of like give a short summary or description of the first episode so we can talk about it a little more?
Yeah. So this episode, do you have the titles handy?
I do. This is 260. What if your husband claimed you were dead?
Yeah. So essentially this episode is the story of the narrator taking us through how she entered into this extremely like toxic is not even enough of a word. Abusive is the word. Thank you. This like abusive relationship with a husband who at first it's like, okay, the way she's telling it's like, okay, he's gaslighting her and being emotionally manipulative and being like somewhat dishonest about certain things or being very secretive. It's unclear what all that is. And then over the course of the episode, you find out, as she does in the story, that he is concocting these very elaborate lies with other people in his life where he's claiming that she's passed away in order to get sympathy from people he knows, in order to like engage in sexual activity with other people, et cetera, et cetera. So she's kind of taking us through the course of how this relationship started, how it progressed, how she uncovered this information, and how she's navigated after ending that relationship, co-parenting with this person who she shares 2 kids with. So that's kind of the broad strokes of the episode. Did you have anything to add to that summary besides what I shared there?
No, but it is you hit all the big beats, but it's the back third of this one that I think sold me on doing this podcast for the show, is like her coming back and talking about, most crucially, like the letter she writes him after she leaves, as she's planning to leave. I mean, and how scary that was for her to write, but also cathartic and like necessary to do that, because this is like depressingly common, you guys, like women in awful domestic abuse situations, and to be able to not only leave but like, or I guess to kick him out, right, because it's her house. Do I remember correctly?
Yeah.
To basically, this is done, and to be able to like put that to paper is really, really powerful, and represents this, again, the catharsis of this episode of like, I can say this, I can admit that this happened, I can tell you guys this story, and I know I'm not wrong anymore because he gaslit me so much. So all three of these episodes feature some of the most intense gaslighting I've ever, like psychology textbook gaslighting that I've ever heard of. And for her to be like, yep, and what I'm describing to you was real, and I feel confident saying that. I think the part that made me actually cry was this quote from the very end, where she talks about going to therapy and learning to become present again. And she says, once you land back in your body, back into yourself, after a tragic event, the possibilities are limitless, and like, there's something universal there. That's the other thing that I think works about the show, is like, these are really hyper specific tragic events that we can all learn something from. Like, there is potential for healing and growth out of even the worst situation you're ever going to be in. And it's going to be slow and hard and weird, and sometimes it'll go backwards, but healing does happen. And this person is a testament to it. It's a really tough one. And I was like hoping you would continue to at least the second one, because I was like, this might be the toughest one. Because the second episode, 261, what if your mother was the victim of a secret government experiment, ends up being, at least for the first, I'd say half of it, like kind of just a history lesson, like a really sad history lesson. Because this person's mother was a victim of the MK Ultra experiments, being undertaken by the CIA in the 50s and into the 70s, and was like given medication and treatment that was framed as helping her, but was actually basically testing her ability to survive diseases, so that they could use that on other people.
My understanding, I'd heard of MK Ultra, but had never like really learned what it was. But my understanding is it was this set of experiments, like you said, conducted by the CIA over a few decades, the goal of which was to like test interrogation techniques and figure out a way to control people's minds. And a lot of the experiments involved using LSD and electroshock therapy, among other things. And so this woman is describing her mother's experience, like being given LSD as a child, because she was the child of like a university employee where some of these experiments were being conducted. And the implication is that university employees were essentially strong-armed into like allowing their children to be a part of these trials, and like electroshock therapy, like I said. So there's some discussion of like the historical context and the overall operations of MK Ultra, and then from there it's this like very personal story of the subsequent like familial traumas that resulted from that experience. Like her mother not going to the hospital for a preventable medical condition, seemingly because she like lost faith in medicine, or like was distrustful of people who prescribed medicine or administered medical procedures. So she died of appendicitis, which didn't have to happen. And then a lot of it was about the narrator's relationship with her father in the wake of her mother passing away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one hit not necessarily close to home. Like, I haven't dealt with anything of this severity, but the first time I watched Requiem for a Dream, like Jared Leto's character and the young woman's character, their storylines like didn't really affect me that much. I was like, this is sad, and like drug abuse is tragic, for sure. But it was Ellen Burstyn's character that like really broke my heart in that film, because so much of it is like based on trusting medical professionals to like help you. And I think that there is a generation of adults, like our parents' generation, who were in some ways like given false information by medical professionals. And I'm not saying that to discredit anybody, but like, except the people who, you know, perpetrated MK Ultra. I think that there's just a fear, and it's for some people it still remains as this sort of like trauma of like, I'm afraid of the doctor, and I'm afraid of being given pills from anybody, because what if they are doing this to me? And that's the thing that I hate. It makes me so sad when I read about MK Ultra. It's like, people still just believe this, and it sucks because there was a real example of it happening, right? Like, it's like when I also like reading about the Tuskegee experiments. Like, we like to trust that people who tell us that they have our best interests in mind are helping us, and sometimes they just don't. And you gotta be choosy about that stuff. But when it's within the family, like within her mother's father, you know, what are you supposed to do? And you're doing it from childhood. It's absolutely a gut punch of an episode. And what's incredible is, like, again, talking about the perspective, is like, this episode is not just about the mother. It's about the daughter, like you said, growing up, realizing that stuff, dealing with that tragedy as a kid, and then like trying to be a functioning adult after all of that. And so she talks a lot about how important therapy was for her. She references EMDR, which is a form of therapy that's used to help people deal with past intense trauma, that I learned a lot about actually myself from my therapist. And the part that got me in this one was she talks about how are you supposed to feel normal and good when your parents aren't doing well? Like, when she was a child, she says over and over again, like, I just wanted my mom to be happy and healthy, and she just wasn't. And I kept wishing she would be better. And how am I supposed to feel well about myself when my parent doesn't feel well? Because we reflect off of them. We imprint. So for so much of her childhood, it's like, well, mom is sick and in the hospital again, so I guess things are bad, even if they're not happening directly to her.
Yeah. And it's this like really haunting parallel of her as a child gaining awareness of her mom's childhood trauma, like experiencing things that she had no conception of, didn't understand, because she was being forcibly given LSD without being told what it was or what it would do to her, and also being submitted to electroshock therapy without being told what it was or what it would do to her. And then like that's happening. She then loses her mother when she's a kid and can't go into adulthood with her mother to like process those things together. And then to me, it was just really a fascinating thing for her to then do EMDR, which is like kind of an intense therapeutic process in order to like regain memories, or like bring her conception of her past closer to what actually happened, and like kind of through these scientific processes reconstruct the like connections to the world around her that were deconstructed before she was even born, by the things that happened to her mom. So I think that arc was like really powerful. And across both episodes, 260 and 261, there was this commonality of like, here are the things that like either happened to my parents, or that, you know, my parents' relationship with me put me in this position as a kid where I felt like I needed to be the peacemaker, or I needed to fix their relationship, or I needed to make sure that she was okay. I needed to be the caretaker. And now I am a parent myself, and it's this like extremely healing, restorative thing that's been a part of like me discovering who I am and who I want to be for them. And in both of those episodes, I thought that that was a really affecting like reflection for the narrators to share.
Yeah, and the lesson being that like, not only can you move on past this, but you can be a mother too. You know, this didn't, eliminate your ability to be a parent,
Right.
which I think was also really wonderful, because that's something I worry about as well, right? Everybody who wants to be a parent someday thinks, do I have too much trauma backed up, or my parents struggled, am I going to struggle the same way or worse? And it's just it's a tough situation. So it's really beautiful that she was able to end up having a child.
Yeah, and I think both these episodes kind of venture into territory that's a little tricky to get this message right. But both of them essentially make the argument of these experiences can be learning for you, and they can help you to like build your assets, right? I think where that sort of message gets tricky is when people assume that you need to experience trauma in order to have assets as a person, like in order to be effective at something, or in order to be interested in helping people with a certain thing, you need to have had XYZ experience. Or when people make the assumption that like, oh, because you've had XYZ experience, like you're now going to be good at this or good at that. And I think what's really happening here is both of these people went through hard shit and they did the work to understand it and understand what they can take from it. And now they've taken something from it. So I really like that. But, sometimes I think people can misconstrue that theme in a way that can be problematic if you're not careful.
Yeah, and it's something I think about a ton of, like, I have to go through problems and struggle to be good. And it's like, no.
Right.
Yes, a lot of the people I know who are like the sweetest, most empathetic people in the world went through tragedy and hardship. And yes, that shapes you into who you can be, but you don't have to. You know, it just does do that. And that's a positive thing we can take forward for the people who suffered that way.
Yeah, it's like the classic, capitalist philosophy issue of like you don't have to suffer to feel joy. You can draw joy from suffering is like the more accurate statement, I think.
And growth.
Right. I guess growth is a better word there.
Do you want me to tell you about the third episode?
Yeah.
So this one is it's really wild. It's called What If You Thought Everyone Was Dead? It's episode 266. And it's about a woman who, at the end of the episode, I'll explain why, reveals her name is Kimberly Rose. And, tell me if you've heard this before, starts out with an abusive partner, which, again, is the sort of theme of this. This partner routinely convinced her that she was mentally unwell and that she was, not good, and would physically assault her. And they had a sort of like toxic romance between the two of them, where she would try to forgive his problems. This is a very, it's a tragically common abuse situation, is the woman usually making excuses for her partner to other people and convincing herself that he's actually good when he's not. So eventually she starts having these like mental hallucinations, because she is dissociating so hard and she's so traumatized. She starts hallucinating, and she has it in her head that she wants to travel across the world, to South America, I believe, to Peru. And the majority of the episode is about this fascinating story about the moment that changed her life. It's not the relationship, but it's what happened when she decided, I'm going to reset everything and go to Peru. She has a stopover in California. This episode, despite being incredibly sad, is also very funny. In California, on the plane, she runs into a guy while she's like having hallucinations about what's happening and like, people are coming for me. A guy who says, yeah, I understand, and like kind of tries to help her. She realizes later that he's probably just like a California new age guru type dude. And so she's in the airport with this guy and she's confused and she's hallucinating very heavily. It happens again with another gentleman. And she just wanders out of the airport, out of an emergency exit, and walks like onto the tarmac. And the staff, obviously there's a silent alarm, and then the staff like pull her back, and she gets sent to jail. And because she, claims like, I just was trying to get away, like that seemed like the right thing to do, they, end up putting her in jail, where some horrible things happen to her that I'm not going to go into. And then she's asked to plead insanity. And if you don't know much about the American legal system, or I guess she's Australian, so, but she's in America, so the American legal system, it's incredibly hard to get off on an insanity plea, right? Because it's hard to prove. And so she attempts to do that, ends up in jail for even longer, ends up in solitary because they're concerned that she may attempt to self-harm. And in solitary, her visions get way more intense. And then she's able to get out, and somebody tells her years later when she becomes a lawyer that like, hey, or she meets a lawyer friend who's like, hey, they shouldn't have attempted to get you off on that. I think I'm willing to take on your case. And as an adult, she finds solace in this and is able to have her record cleared from this whole traumatic event. She's past the partner, and she talks a lot in the end of the episode about how she wanted to tell this story, and it wasn't just like, and that's why I'm on this podcast. It's like, that's why I'm a stand-up comedian, and you can check me out, and here's my socials. And she finds power and confidence in being able to say, and this is real. And I tell it, and I'm honest about it because it happened to me and it matters a lot. And maybe it happened to someone else, but it was so ridiculous and weird and specific that like, I don't even know how to process it other than to just tell people about it. And so for her to come out of this, not only seemingly much more okay, but like telling it in a comedic way as a comedian and like being famous for it is super inspiring. And then also leads into her saying, and that's why I'm on This Is Actually Happening, is because I wanted you guys to hear this fascinating thing that happened to me.
Wow.
It's a wild adventure. The airport story sequence is like some of the wildest podcast material I've heard in a long time. I was like, because it's not sad. That part is not even sad. It's just like, what? And then what? And then what did they do to you? Like, what?
Yeah.
Then the scary, but then like, yeah, the stuff with her going to prison is like horrible, and the prison system doesn't know how to deal with mental health at all. And
right.
Yeah, it's an up and down one for sure, but a fascinating episode. And I feel weird, right? I still feel weird calling this fascinating because it's someone's life.
Right.
And so I come out of This Is Actually Happening feeling mixed on like, do I recommend this to people? Do you, Pagellan?
I don't know. I don't see myself listening to more of this, just because it's not really something. It's not the kind of thing that I seek out, I guess.
Yeah.
I think to sum up what I've said about it before, like, I wouldn't go out of my way to say, oh, you should listen to this. But if I have a sense that I know somebody who likes storytelling podcasts, wants to reflect on harder stuff or whatever, what I like about this show is it's people telling their own stories. It's people getting the chance to like tell the story in the completeness of its nuance and the full arc of the story, like where it started, the deeper context for them, what they've made of it. So it feels like it's doing the thing that it's trying to do as well as you could do it. And you're just never going to get around the fact that like podcasts exist in a sort of like content marketplace where they need to have a brand and they need to run fucking mid-roll ads for BetterHelp, which was like felt predatory to be honest.
Yeah.
Having not had a great experience with digital whatever those are called, like whatever those services are called.
Yeah, they're digital therapy matching services.
Yeah, I've had bad experiences, not bad, but not great experiences with that and with talkiatry and like that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
that was my only big like, yuck, this is yucky.
I hate
but
the
like,
ad breaks on this. They suck so much.
Yeah. But like, you're never going to get around the fact that this podcast needs to make money and it needs to advertise itself to people and whatever. And all of those things about it are shitty. But the actual content of the podcast when you're listening to it, I think is well done. So like, if that's your cup of tea, then listen to it. It's not my cup of tea, so I'm probably not going to listen to more of it, which is why I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not like unrecommending it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think there are people who will appreciate this podcast. And I will probably not continue listening to it. And I think it's okay. This is, again, like what I said about choosing this to challenge us. It's like, we don't have to like every pickle, you know?
Right. Right.
Thinking of it as like, I think back to that Elden Ring stream sometimes, and like, what was the intent? And you had mentioned like this will be an extension of Chatsims, and technically Chatsims are recommendations, but also recommendations are flexible. They are not set in stone. They're not permanent. If a friend tells you 6 months ago that they like something, and you listen to it and you find out, oh, this was actually terrible, or this guy got canceled on social media, that doesn't speak poorly to the friend who recommended it. It shouldn't.
Right.
It doesn't mean they have bad taste. It just means that these things are complicated and tastes change over time.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
And I'm sticking to it.
Agreed.
So I think that we don't really need to go into final thoughts because we just did. So Magellan, let's pivot hard. What is yours and maybe the final pickle for next week?
Yeah. To wrap up Chatz in a Pickle, I wanted to do something that kind of got at the meta thing going on in this season, which is like, the reason that we like to do normal chats in this sort of slow motion, slow binge way is because there's this constant onslaught in every part of our lives of like, hey, check this out, do this thing, do that thing. Oh, you haven't seen this yet? Oh, maybe you should. And what's been interesting and I think kind of fun about Chatz in a Pickle, but also kind of difficult, is letting that onslaught in a little bit and trying to curate it and saying like, okay, well, we'll devote 2 hours this week to this particular thing. And what I've liked about that is we've been able to explore things that we don't normally talk about on the show, like this podcast. But what's challenging about it is I feel more acutely that feeling of like, I have so little life to spend on like all of the things that I'm being told I should be spending my life on.
Right.
So I want to bring that horrible feeling to its absolute extreme. And this is my challenge to you.
Okay.
Between now and the next time we record, anything that somebody talks to you about or texts you about where they either directly state or, well, okay, this is where it gets fishy. If someone directly says to you, you should watch, you should listen to, you should check out blank, you must spend at least 5 minutes doing that.
Damn.
So it's sort of like a yes man, but to recommendations.
I'm assuming
only-
Whamageddon rules, which means like we can't do it to each other. We can't do it maliciously.
Can't do it to each other. Can't do it maliciously. I think if you like let somebody in on it, then they can't do it to you. Like, don't go around wearing a sign that says like, don't recommend things to me.
Right.
But
or recommend things to me. Don't.
If it comes up that this is what we're doing this week, then like that person can't then take advantage of the system. And then the only caveat I'll give is if doing the thing is like prohibitively expensive. So if someone's like, oh my God, you got to go to Disney World. Like, obviously you can't do that this week.
I'll figure out a way.
I guess what you could do is you could spend 5 minutes like looking into what it would take to go to Disney World or what you would do at Disney World or something like that. So let's do it that way. Where if it's like prohibitively expensive or difficult to access the thing, take 5 minutes to do something that's like related to it. And then we'll kind of do the rundown of all the things that we were told to do. The gray area here is if someone talks to you about something like, oh, I'm watching this show. Oh my God, it's so good. Da 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 da. And they don't ever say you should watch it. I think it's up to you if you want to, or if you're like, well, that didn't count. Because I honestly don't know how much I get recommended things. Like maybe it's going to be totally crickets, so I need to take it where I can get it. Or maybe I'm going to get overwhelmed by suggestions. So kind of modulate that as needed.
Yeah, it's very Whamageddon. For those who don't know, if you listen, we have this game that I found on Twitter like 8 years ago, where if you hear Last Christmas I Wham in the month of December before Christmas, then you lose the challenge. And it has to happen organically. Nobody can play it for you, and covers don't count. And you just post about it online. It's super fun, and this idea sounds similar to that, where I'm like, I'm actually scared. I'm like, what could somebody possibly recommend to me that I'm gonna suddenly fall into? Because like I have a friend who's really great, and she talks about Supernatural a lot, and she always ends the conversation being like, if you want to watch it, I would watch it with you, and like I might get trapped. I'm not gonna force it, but if the pivot happens, I'm gonna let it happen. That's all.
My students recommend a lot of anime to me. I'll be
honest. Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna have to watch at least one anime thing.
I'm gonna.
The only other rule is also like if you're in a Discord or a group chat or something, where someone's like, "Oh my god, you all need to watch whatever," you're not required to do that unless you're again like looking for things to talk about on the podcast. Then you can do that.
Yeah, that is also specifically so that you guys, in the 24 hours between hearing this and us recording, can't be like, hey, here's 50 shows that I think you should finally watch.
Well, you could direct message us if it's like a targeted recommendation.
Yeah.
And, if I have the time, I mean, I'll see what I can do. But you're gonna catch me on a Sunday where I'm already planning out some stuff I'm doing that day. So
right,
I'm not gonna prioritize Ryan recommending me whatever movie he wants me to watch.
Vine boom. I'll put a Vine boom there. That was good.
But I'll give you 5. I'll give every individual person 5 minutes of my time. Is my pledge.
So be choosy.
So yeah, choose wisely.
Anyways, that sounds awesome. I think I have one more question for you, which is where can people find you on the podcast sphere?
Oh, you can find me in a couple places. You can listen to me on another podcast called Super Smash Echoes that I do with my friend Justin, where we play video games related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise and discuss them. Check it out, Super Smash Echoes. You can also read some of my writing on notthatmagellan.substack.com. That is my newsletter, Not That Magellan, the newsletter. And that's that. Alan, what about you?
I can be found on a couple shows, mainly on scanlinemedia.com. You can hear me on the Creature Quorum talking about Monster Hunter and Pokemon. You can hear me on the Garner Wager talking about Korean game shows again because the strikes are over. So we can watch the new show from the people who made The Genius on Netflix. We're also doing tabletop stuff and storytelling stuff over there. It's very weird and silly. And every other month you can hear me on Talking Marketing on amaboston.org. I host that bi-monthly for part of my volunteer job with them. And last week I just put out an episode chatting with a guy named Chris Wallace about, customer focused sales and marketing. It's a bit jargon heavy, but it's a fun one and a brief one. So that's what we got. Magellan, I'd like to do the plugs on this week if you don't mind. And I know you don't.
Take it away.
If you have questions, comments, concerns for us, you can send them over to our email. It's chatspot@gmail.com. We are at Chatspot on Twitter until that website explodes. We are Chatz, a television podcast on YouTube, where every episode of the show is uploaded consistently, if I remember. And also, if you like the show, you can rate us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can support us financially over on patreon.com/chatspot. We're at $1, $3, or $5 a month. You get a plethora of bonus content, including movie commentaries, pilot discussions, and hangout pods. I've been told recently that people really like our hangout pods. Shout outs to some of our patrons who leave comments and say, hey, we like the hangout pods because they are so fun to record. And they're just, us being besties. That's all. If you support us at $5 a month specifically, you get everything I just told you, and I thank you at the end of every main feed episode. So as of today, which is November 13th, I would like to say thank you to our $5 patrons, who include Arthur, Emerus, Jen, Justin, Kyrie, Lee, Marcus, May Louise, Michael, Magellan's mom, Pat, Noel, Six, and Stefan. Thank you guys for being the Chatsy Watsy Deluxe Comfort Plus tier on our Patreon. All these chats can be found at chatspot.com, and if you like our main feed art, it was done by our friend Camilla. She can be found at Camilla Strader on social media. Before we go, the miniature version of the show is a segment called Chatsims, where we recommend you things to enjoy between now and next week. Magellan, what is or are your Chatsims for this week?
I don't know how strongly I'm recommending this, but I want to give people a review of Jackbox Party Pack 10 because we played through all of those the other day after our little Thanksgiving dinner. This is like a partial recommend. It's definitely not my favorite Jackbox pack. And I will say they raised the price of this one compared to other ones, which is kind of annoying. It's like $35, which I don't love. But out of the 5 games, I'll tell you which ones we liked and which ones we were kind of like not as hot on. There's Fixie Text, which is essentially like multiple people trying to type in the same text message at the same time. That one's really fun. I enjoyed that one. It created some goofy situations. Then people get to vote on like which words were their favorites from the text. TKO 2, they brought back TKO, the t-shirt making game, which is just a classic. It's good. I don't remember TKO 1 enough to compare it, but it's like basically the same game. Dodo Re Mi is this really odd like bird rhythm game. It's like
they made a rock band basically.
Yeah, they made a rock band where there's no way to intelligibly play it simultaneously. So everybody like individually does their rock band parts on their phone, and then the game stitches them together and plays it back for you, which is it's strange. There might be something there, but I'm not 100% sure. Time Jinx, which is kind of a fun like history trivia sort of thing. I thought that was okay. And then Hypnotorious was honestly confusing and I don't think was very good. So this one
mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag for sure if you're wondering about getting it. I wouldn't recommend getting it over some of the last few. But you know, it's as fun as many Jackbox party packs are, I'll say.
Incredible.
What about you? What's your Chatsum?
Brother, I am allowed to chat some struck work now. And I'm not going to blow my load and chat some every single thing that I've watched in the last couple of months. Because I've been watching a lot of TV and I talk about it in the Discord and you guys like it when I talk about it. But I'm not going to tell you all of it just yet. I'm going to drip feed you it. I read a great poetry book this past week called How Her Spirit Got Out by Kristen Hill. It's short. It's mainly about womanhood and growing up as a black woman in Boston. It's powerful. It's good. It's sharp. It's pretty funny, honestly. It's How Her Spirit Got Out by Kristen Hill. I've been reading a manga. It's called Nobu Izakaya. I think that's what it's called. I think that's the full name of it. It's based on a light novel. And it was given to me. The first volume was bought for me by a friend of the podcast, Nick. When we went to California, me, Six, and Nick bought each other in a sort of like circle. Each person got a volume of a manga that they've never read before. So I bought Six bought Nick one, Nick bought me one. And he bought me Izakaya Nobu, which is about a Japanese restaurant in a fictional 20th century Germany that these German soldiers come into, and they're like, I want food. All I ever eat is potatoes and depression. And they come in there and they're like, oh my God, food is so good. And it's like about food and culture and cultural exchange. It's quite fun, quite good. And then this is the first struck work that I've chat-summed in months. The new Pluto adaptation, which is itself an adaptation of Astro Boy, the anime that's on Netflix. The new Pluto anime is fucking awesome. And you should watch it, even if you don't like anime, because each episode's an hour, so it's structured like a, procedural drama. It's a murder mystery about robots getting murdered, but it's also about humanity. And the first episode made me freaking cry, dude. It's great, and it's so beautifully animated. It's from the same team that, some of the same people who worked on the movie Monster, I believe, or the anime Monster rather. It's so good. Just check out Pluto. It's on Netflix. I'm getting back into the sort of swing of things. How do I chat some television and film again? And it's by just begging you to watch these things. So that's what I got for you. Sorry for the mouthful. Oh, but that's what we got, folks. And Magellan, I'd really like to thank you for being... There's nothing I can quote from these episodes, huh? I really just have to say something. Thank you for being the friend to my friend, because we are friends.
Yeah, I like that.
And yeah, congratulations against SAG-AFTRA. And let's get it, guys. Let's freaking party. Chatz is back with a vengeance. Woo! We'll be back next week. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.